Thanks for everyone on the Discord listening in. Wanted to kind of make this more than just a standard text AMA, and so really wanted to be able to have all of you be able to hear my thought process while I think through and type out the answers to my questions on the Reddit thread. If any of you are not already on the Reddit thread, that's where I'm going to be pulling all the questions from. I'll go drop it in the general channel right now. So as most of you know, this AMA is coming after a period of pretty significant roster changes to the LA Valiant. We went through a pretty decent shift in the way our roster composition worked, and that left a lot of people with questions and some doubts, justifiable, around the way that we'd be working as a team going forward. So this AMA is intended to kind of be a follow-up to the video that we put out on Wednesday and really answer any remaining questions, any outstanding doubts about concerns, about your favorite players that may or may not still be playing for us. Basically, just trying to make sure we take care of all of the outstanding issues, and then we can, get back to doing what we do best, which is supporting the team as they play regular season matches of Overwatch League. And you can catch us against the Shanghai Dragons later tonight. I love Gigery as much as anybody, but unfortunately, we're going to have to beat her today. So with that said, let's kick off going through these questions on the Reddit thread on r/competitiveoverwatch, and I'll do my best to talk through both the questions and my answers. Um, Unsurprisingly, the first question is about the infamous in and out scene from the Last Chance episode of Inside LA Valiant. So the first question is, why do you think it was a good idea to include the in and out scene in Last Chance? In hindsight, do you regret it? So my answer to this is a little complicated. First, I want people to understand that like the the in and out scene as it came through in Last Chance was in some ways kind of a comedy not of errors, but a comedy of unlucky circumstances. So originally, the plan was just go out, get food with Agilities, and kind of talk him through what our plans for him on the roster were. So I asked him, where do you want to go get food? And his answer was In and Out because it's right near the player apartments. Um, so plan was to go and get In and Out, sit at a table at In and Out, and talk about what was going on. Unfortunately, it was raining, and so we couldn't do it inside, and we couldn't do it at an outside table. So we were kind of forced to go into again the infamous car in order to get the capture of the scene that we were looking for. So it definitely came off melodramatic, and it came off as not, the most tasteful way to have that kind of conversation with a player. But it wasn't constructed that way intentionally, and it wasn't done to create some overly dramatic moment. It was done because we were kind of forced into that by the circumstances of our shoot. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a good idea to put it in the video as is. Look, like I certainly wish, based on community reaction, that we had been able to construct it in a different way. But I think the context that it was difficult to give as part of the piece of content was uh, that when we were speaking to Agilities about his future on the roster, it was important that we impress upon him like the impact that his work ethic and the impact that his approach towards playing with his teammates would have on the overall team environment, and definitely could have done that in a better way, not just from a content creation perspective, but certainly I'm not the most experienced GM out there. I don't have tons of traditional sports experience to bring to bear here, so I'm kind of doing my best. And though the tone wasn't where I wanted it to be, um, I guess don't live with regrets in mind, and I think hopefully we've done a better job since then, not just of communicating with players on an individual basis, but of creating a team environment in which players like Agilities can succeed, which hopefully we've seen starting off with the match against Seoul Dynasty earlier this week, where Agilities popped off. He did great, and as far as I can tell, he's doing great in this new team environment. The second part to the first poster's question in the subreddit AMA is, now that the in and out question is out of the way, do you plan to bench players on specific maps, or plan to play bench players on specific maps like Finzi on Kings Row? And I believe the commenter is asking this because Finzy's known for having a very good Zarya, which is important in triple or quad tank compositions that you play on King's Row. What I just said about Zarya being important in triple and quad tank compositions on King's Row, I surprised myself because I really don't know that much about the game. So, as much as I would love to be able to give a full account of our plans on every single map and the players we're going to play on it, um, that's not a question I can get into too much detail on, both because I don't want to reveal all of our strategies, but also because a lot of that responsibility of making those decisions lies with the coaching staff on a day-to-day basis, not with me. And so, certainly from a philosophical perspective, what we're planning to do is not have like set starters and set subs that are locked in stone and never changing. Our plan is more so to have a fluid roster where the best player on any given map has the opportunity to play. There's no doubt Finzi Zarya is really good. Zarya is a great pick on King's Row, but it's a little hard to anticipate the way that the roster composition will shake out, the amount of synergy that Space will be able to build with the team versus Finzi versus any other player. And so I guess what I want to say is that we're not really approaching the roster composition and we didn't approach building the roster as though we have players that we have specifically in mind to play on certain maps. It's more so from the perspective of all of the players we brought on, we feel having the attitude and the determination and the skill necessary to be at an Overwatch League level, while also recognizing that the people that get playtime are going to change. It's not going to be set in stone, and which players have the opportunity to play is going to be based on their effort. It's going to be based on the effort and the skill and the results of the other player in that role. Um, and it's going to be based on the way that the coaching staff is feeling on any given day. Um, all right, the next question is from LA Valiant Discord regular Flatulent Dwarf. Um, and the question here is asking about the term fatigue that Coach Moon used a lot when describing the situation of Unkoe and the situation of Envy in the latest special edition of Inside LA Valiant roster video. Um, and so Dwarf's question is, do you think that the current Overwatch League schedule is sustainable in the long run, or do you think adjustments will need to be made in future seasons to keep players from experiencing the fatigue that seems to be plaguing the Overwatch League? So this is definitely an ongoing issue, not just for our team, but for all teams. So first, I want to say that specifically in Overwatch League, I think the first most important thing to understand about why players are feeling fatigue in Overwatch League is because Overwatch League is really the first kind of consistently scheduled playtime for a lot of these players in their careers. Um, Keep in mind that during Apex or during the Alienware monthly melee era before the start of Overwatch League, teams would be playing one or two online tournaments per month. They wouldn't have kind of consistent matches every single week. They definitely didn't have such strenuous scrim schedules. And so the adjustment to Overwatch League isn't just about adjusting to Overwatch League from a level of play perspective, it's also about adjusting to just the quantity of play in Overwatch League. Like you're playing so much Overwatch every single week if you're playing two regular season matches and then scrims on top of that and then end of stage playoffs. It's a lot of Overwatch. And that is 6, 7 months of just consistent nonstop play. So fatigue's a very real factor. But I don't necessarily think that it's the schedule that's causing it. I think it's largely players that are just not adjusted to the schedule, right? If you look at other consistent leagues like LCS, um, you're able to kind of have these very similar league-like schedules um, without there being as much fatigue because players have kind of mentally adjusted to the flow of the league. Whereas I think for Overwatch League, people came in kind of at a dead sprint from day one, expecting that to have the endurance necessary to last for the entire league and not really trying to pace themselves in the way that they adjusted their practice schedules. Um, and so I think the real adjustment that needs to happen is an adjustment we've been trying to do with our players, which is understanding that not every single regular season match is a must win, right? You can take it a little easy sometimes. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you need to be able to pace yourself when it comes to intensity of practice, when it comes to uh, kind of finding interests and outlets outside of the game and outside of the team environment. That's essential in order to sustain yourself and your team over the course of a long season like the Overwatch League has. The next question, just moving down the list in the subreddit, is from Jane F., who has a question regarding Grim Reality's move into a coaching position. As an aspiring Overwatch League coach, who do you think makes a better coach and why? A pro player who transitioned into coaching after having played at the highest level, or someone who has coaching experience and formal training outside of esports? What are the main pros and cons? So I think this isn't too complicated a question. Obviously, there's a bit of a give and take here, and I think neither one of these two ends of the extreme spectrum encompasses everything that a coach needs to know. So, from my experience, having a coach that uh, having a coach that has been a pro player but without much external coaching experience, they're going to understand a lot about the game, and they're going to really be able to put themselves in the shoes of the other pro players that are part of that team, and that's great. Having coaches that understand the needs of other players is one of the most important things you can have in a coach. And having a coach that was a pro player means that there's an inherent respect there from the players because they understand enough about the game. Someone that has coaching experience outside of esports is probably much better able to inject a level of balance, physical fitness, mental fitness, all the outside of the game things that I think pro players can often underrate, um, and not really assign as much importance to as maybe they should. So from my perspective, the ideal coach is someone that was both a pro player and has formal experience outside of esports. Um, but if you have to pick one or the other, there's too much nuance in there to really be able to say. So I think from my perspective, we've approached it from both ends. We've taken people with coaching experience outside of esports and educated them about the game, like our director of player performance, Doug Gardner. We're also taking people that have pro playing experience and transitioning them into kind of the broader world of sports performance and psychological performance. So Grim is a great example of that. Coach Moon is a great example of that. I think we have a lot of people within our organization that have traditional sports experience and have general sports performance experience that have kind of taken on the task of educating the players and the former players that make up the rest of the coaching staff. Moving on to the next question from It Pirate on the r/competitive Overwatch subreddit. What is your favorite Valiant game so far, and how do you and the investors feel about the success of Overwatch League? Um, Favorite Valiant game so far, I think. I mean, the 4-0 against Seoul earlier this week was pretty nice. But I think my favorite game so far was the first battle for LA, the 3-2 win over Gladiators that we had in Stage 1. That was a pretty awesome environment inside the Blizzard Arena, and also pretty awesome to see the reaction of fans at our viewing party down at UCI. Just overall a really awesome experience. And yes, you should absolutely spam the chat spam Gladiators lol. For the second part of that question, how do you and the investors feel about the success of Overwatch League? I mean, Overwatch League has definitely outpaced a lot of our expectations for where we thought the league would be at this point in time. I definitely would have been happy with a lot fewer viewers than the Overwatch League is getting. I also think that the league has been really great from kind of a professionalism perspective, just from how buttoned up it is. I mean, we're getting some top tier sponsors involved, both with the teams and with the league. And look, it's easy to forget that this league is less than 6 months old, right? Like this league launched in January of this year, and the fact that we're already at this point so quickly is really encouraging about where I think the league can get to over time. So there's obviously a lot of things that we still need to improve on as a league. There's lots of things that we can do as a team better, and can do better for our fans and do better for the overall league. But I think from our perspective, we're really happy with where things are at. Um, and I think we feel like we're on the right trajectory to build something really special. Going to move on to the next question from Keen Frizzle, a question I will answer even though they have the Gladiators flair on the competitive Overwatch subreddit. I am a kind and generous leader. Um, can you elaborate? on Coach Moon's comments on Envy Unkoe as being fatigued and how that affected your decision to remove them from the roster. Um, so I think that in the Inside LA Valiant Special Edition video where we talked about the roster, Coach Moon described Envy and Unko as kind of being fatigued, and because of some of the inherent difficulties that happen when you translate from one language to another, you can lose a lot of the nuance. And so I think from what Coach Moon was saying, his intention was to communicate that they were somewhat fatigued, as in fatigued with the team environment, and things weren't great between them and some of the other players. And so it was easier to kind of have a clean start, not just for the team, but for those individuals, than it was to try and force a fit even more than we had in stage two. And so I think that slight mistranslation or the slight loss of context from Moon's use of fatigued is kind of what led to that misunderstanding. But I think consistently our messaging from me and from other members of the roster has been pretty clear about why we made the choices we did. I also talked a little bit earlier, and I included a text answer in the AMA about how the overall schedule of the Overwatch League and kind of players' unfamiliarity with how kind of intense as well as persistent and consistent this schedule is. Their unfamiliarity with a league-like schedule has led to a good amount of fatigue, and I think will lead to some burnout from teams and players that are not prepared for it. I feel like a user actually did a pretty good job of answering that question on the actual AMA, so I'm not going to type up an answer to that. I'm just going to move on to the next one. So the next question from Snake Warrior is, does Overwatch League take up most of your time, or do you split your time up more evenly between the different esports teams? Right now, it seems like Overwatch League is taking up a significant chunk of your time, so I was wondering. That's a fair question. I think from my perspective, Overwatch League is probably one of the most important projects that we have as an esports organization. For us, Overwatch League provides a great structure and a great level of cooperation with the publisher Activision Blizzard to really build something special for Southern California and for Los Angeles in a way that our other esports initiatives, though they are incredibly important to us and though they do have strong structures behind them, they're not at that same level yet. So especially over the last few months, as we've kind of put together the roster and gone through some coaching staff changes, and really been in the thick of it when it comes to the competitive schedule of the league, a lot of my time and effort has been focused on Overwatch League and how we're building out Los Angeles Valiant, not just from a competitive perspective, but overall in Southern California as a company with lots of fans, hopefully. Um, but not all of my time goes to Overwatch League. I definitely work on some things that are overall for the organization. I do work in Dota, in mobile, in Counter Strike. We're gonna have a lot of fun things going on for the organization, and hopefully we'll have some fun announcements, not just with Los Angeles Valiant, but with Immortals in the future. From Jay Prosk, the Custa Unko trade seems to be working out for both teams involved. Is Custa taking the role of an in-game leader like you were hoping, or is someone else shot calling and he just meshes well with the team style? So I think from our perspective, when we picked up Custa, we knew that he was a very vocal person, not just when it comes to the in-game decision making of the team, but also when it comes to the kind of team environment and team culture. He's a little older, he's a little more experienced, and we really wanted that presence uh, when it came to how we were building the team environment going forward. And so for us, so far, Custa has definitely been very vocal when it comes to the way that we're structuring the competitive team environment and when it comes to what we're doing inside the game. But he's by no means some sort of, you know, all-encompassing in-game leader that's the only one doing the talking throughout the game, right? Those roles and those responsibilities are split up more evenly between multiple different players. So Custa is a very vocal player. Fate is a very vocal player. Space is a very vocal player. And Kareev and Soon and Agilities and all the other players that are rotating in and out of the roster are all kind of taking on their own individual communication roles. Um, you know, nobody is really like permanently silent in an Overwatch team. It's essential to continually communicate targets, continually communicate where you are on the map and what you're doing so that your teammates can play around you. So even though players like Custa or Fate or Space might be a little more vocal in unifying the team to move in a certain direction, they're not like the only ones talking. Everybody's talking. If you've heard the comms from an Overwatch League game, you've probably heard 6 people shouting monkey at as many different frequencies as exist in the world. Um, but I also think that it is important to recognize that some players are going to take on a little bit more of a vocal role. So Custa is definitely a more vocal player. Fate and Space are also very vocal players. And the goal is to get to a point where everybody understands their communication roles really well. Also, still typing, I will say 2 things. One, for long have we waited, your crab boy, Seb, is definitely someone that we intend to give more uh, attention to going forward into the next few stages. And for Audrey, I would absolutely judge your flares on Reddit. Go ahead and ask a question so I can judge you. Yeah. All right, moving on to the next question from Fordeca. Valiant has had a sports psychologist for a few months now, Dr. Doug Gardner. Could you speak about what he does with the team and what impact he has had? So first, glad that Dr. Doug Gardner and his role within our team is becoming a little more public. My first clarification there is that Dr. Gardner isn't just a sports psychologist; he's our director of player performance, and that means not just caring about sports psychology, but also caring about physical fitness and nutrition and the overall health of the player's lifestyle. Our viewpoint is that it's impossible to play well if you're not treating yourself well as a person. And so in order to make sure that our players have the best possible setup for competitive success, and so that we can make sure that they're healthy and happy outside of the game, we wanted to make sure we had resources available for those players beyond just a computer to play at and sufficient caloric intake to keep them alive on a day-to-day basis. So from our perspective, Dr. Gardner and the team that we're assembling under him is really essential for that. So we have Dr. Gardner, who has sports psychology experience, who has been a player development coach in traditional sports leagues like the MLB and the NFL, and who can be a really great emotional resource for these players so that they have someone outside of their immediate team environment that they can talk to about their concerns and their stressors, whether they're related to their professional life or to their personal life. Also, underneath Dr. Gardner, we have Matt, who is our kind of physical therapist and physical trainer, who does a great job both for preventing injuries, helping to correct posture or mouse grip or things that can lead to repetitive stress injuries in the future. Um, and is also someone that helps the players just get into overall good shape to live a happier and healthier life. And that's kind of those are things that we find really important. Again, not just because they make you better at the game, but because they make you a more well-rounded individual, or depending on your body type, a less well-rounded individual, um, in order to make sure that you're like a real person outside of the game. Next question is from Excalibur Prime, which is a great Reddit username. Will we see Bunny and Soon playing together, or is Bunny just a sub for Soon? So I think from our perspective, again, it's very early into the roster process. Bunny, I think, just got to campus yesterday, and so he's only recently been able to kind of start being part of that practice environment. So for us, we don't really want to hard commit to what the structure of the roster will look like because that's still kind of in flux, right? We knew we liked Bunny as a player, we knew we liked Bunny as a person, and he was someone we wanted to be a part of the overall team. But it wouldn't be fair to Soon or to Bunny to kind of preset what the roster would look like before we even see how that works in practice. So I think the intention is that we're going to spend the first few weeks of this stage really experimenting and moving things around and seeing what the best roster composition looks like. Maybe the best roster composition looks like Bunny playing Tracer so that Soon can play Widow on Tracer Widow maps. Maybe the best roster composition looks like Soon playing with Agilities or Soon playing with KSF or Bunny playing with Agilities. We don't know the answers to these questions yet. It's too early into the process to be able to give a prescriptive answer to those questions. So I realize that sounds like a bit of a non-answer, and it kind of is because it's too early to answer that question. But I think from our perspective, the intention isn't Soon is going to be the starter and Bunny is the permanent sub, and it's also not Bunny is the permanent starter and Soon is the permanent sub. I mean, both of them could play whatever the meta dictates, whatever's best for the team and gives us the best chance to win, that's what we're going to be doing. Our next question is from Spider-Man APV, who does have a Valiant flare. Good man. Or woman. I already asked a question, but wanted to ask another. What is the strategy with the 12-man roster? Can you reveal what you're looking for in terms of subs? Is there a set list of starters? And the others are there for when the starters can't play? Are you developing different strategies with different team compositions? Essentially, this question is just what are we doing with having more than just the core 6 players? And I think we've been pretty clear in this from our messaging, but I want to reiterate just in case it hasn't come through yet. For us, having a 12-man roster is really important because it does a lot of things to the team environment. First, it does create a measure of internal competition. So let's take the case of Fate and Numlocked. Fate and Numlocked play the same role. They play a lot of the same heroes. And either Fate or Numlocked could play depending on who is best for the team to win. Right now, Fate has been putting in a lot of work. He has a great impact on the team environment. He's a vocal player, and he's in my opinion, one of the best main tanks in the league. But if Fate was on the roster alone and he goes through a slump or he has difficulty maintaining motivation, we would be in a difficult situation because we wouldn't have the opportunity to do what was best for the team because we wouldn't have a kind of measure of internal competition to make sure that Fate can stay on top of his game and Fate can stay motivated. So for us, having redundancy in every single role is a really important way to make sure that players continue giving their all. And if they feel like they're too stressed, if they're too tired, if they're unable to really commit the time and energy and motivation necessary to be an Overwatch League caliber player, then we have another player there in that position ready to step in, ready to take up that mantle. That also gives us the opportunity to do internal scrims. And internal scrims are so important and so helpful because it allows us to test very specific strategies in very specific situations without kind of revealing those strategies to potential opponents. As much as we'd like to assume otherwise, when you scrim with a particular composition against another team, sometimes that can leak out. And other teams can become aware of it, even teams that you haven't scrimmed against with it. So if we are wanting to be top secret about something, if we're wanting to test out a very specific strategy on a specific map against a specific comp, then we would be able to do that via internal scrims. And I think that's something, one of the main benefits of having a 12-man roster, and one of the like very rare things about Overwatch League. In a lot of other leagues, you don't really have the opportunity to do internal scrims like that. OMG, it's Luna. Unsure whether that is our VP of Content's Reddit account or whether that is a real user, but I will answer the question all the same. How does Moon plan on giving all 12 players time on the stage without doing what Soul does and quote-unquote throwing matches due to what seems like bad player choices? And question 2, what are the biggest issues that the team has that you are working on fixing? So to answer the first question, I'd say that as much as we'd love to be in a situation where all 12 players can get stage time, Moon's prerogative as a coach is not how can I get all 12 players stage time. Moon's prerogative as a coach is how can I give us the best chance to win as many games as possible. That will mean sometimes we want to give our best players a little bit of rest by playing some players that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to start. Sometimes that will mean even against a weaker team, we want to put on our strongest players because this is a really important game. But as much as I wish it wasn't the case, in a competitive team environment, it's not about giving every single player the same amount of playtime and being quote unquote fair, because that's not fair to the team. That doesn't create the best chance of the team winning. So we're certainly not approaching a 12-man roster scenario from the perspective of how do we get all 12 players stage time. We're approaching a 12-man roster scenario from how do we give all 12 players a chance to show what they can do in practice, and anybody that earns stage time will get it. For the second question, what are the biggest issues that the team has that you're working on fixing? Again, I think the biggest issues we went into the offseason between Stage 2 and Stage 3 trying to fix was kind of team chemistry and internal team dynamics. So we brought on players that weren't just very talented, but players that we felt would have a great impact on team environment. And really create a growth-oriented mindset, right? Our goal for this team is not to have, everyone focused purely on the win and loss column. We think that there's a lot of room for this team to grow. We think that if we're going to eventually end up beating Korean teams, which I hope that we will, on a consistent basis, we have a long way to go before we're there. Most teams do. And so in order to do that, we have to remain focused on how do we grow as a team, not just how do we win the 2 matches that we have this week. And I think Moon and all the other staff and the players that we have on board at this point are very aligned in that outlook. And I think, or at least from sitting in on practice, I feel like we're in a good place. Yeah, we've definitely beaten Seoul twice. I understand. They're a Korean team too, but I mean like New York and London. I mean New York and London. Those are the ones we haven't beaten yet. Things are feeling good. Things are feeling like we're on the right track. But it's really important to be hands-on with that process to make sure that we stay on the right track. The next question I'm going to answer is from Schmackdown, also a great Reddit username. What is your approach to the language barrier between players and staff? I've never seen the new coach speak English, so I was wondering if this has caused any difficulties. So, answer to this is we have 2 solutions. One is short-term, one is long-term. So first, Coach Moon does not come in speaking fluent English. He's a Korean coach that's lived in Korea his entire life, speaks great Korean, better Korean than me, but does not speak a lot of English. In order to deal with that in the short term, we have a full-time Korean translator who assists him in speaking with non-Korean speaking players, and also assists when the Korean players have to interact with the non-Korean coaching staff. So that's really helpful. His name's Andrew. He's great. Props to Andrew. Over the long term, we have all of our Korean players and Coach Moon taking English lessons to improve their English fluency. That's helped players like Fate a lot, who came in to the US speaking decent English, but is now much improved when it comes to the level of English that he speaks. And that helps both inside the game with shot calling and communication, but also outside the game with just assisting and kind of smoothing over interactions between teammates, letting them interact socially better. Although Kareev manages to interact socially just fine without doing much speaking at all, let alone in English. Next question is from Chad Senpai. What would you say was your biggest regret of the season so far? I would say, from our perspective, from my perspective, my personal biggest regret of the season so far was I think a lot of the problems that became pretty evident towards the tail end of Stage 2 were problems that we had even since the beginning in Stage 1 and through the early parts of Stage 2. And I think especially with all the changes we were going through on the coaching staff side of things, I think I kind of tried to tough it out a little too much, right? I tried to just force a fit and see if incremental changes could fix things, right? So maybe a new coach will fix things, or maybe changing up the roster a little bit will fix things, or maybe putting Kareev on DPS will create a better team environment, right? And I don't think any of those incremental changes really made a significant difference. And so we ended up needing to push that kind of bigger reset button and do a broader suite of changes towards the end of Stage 2 anyway. And I kind of wish that we could have gone forward with that and made those changes earlier on, so that we would have had a little more time together with the new players and not had to have done everything at the last minute. But I also don't necessarily believe in like holding on to those regrets. I think I learned my lesson from it, which is when you have difficulties like that, when you have structural issues like that, you kind of need to address them all at once rather than fix one and hope that the others fix themselves. I know that now. Hopefully I can address those kinds of situations in a better way going forward, but I also feel like despite taking a little bit longer to deal with those issues, we ended up with I think we ended up in a really good place. It's early to say that, I know, and I don't want to promise that we're going to win every game from here on out, but inside the team environment feels really good right now. I think the players are feeling good. I'm feeling good. The staff is feeling good. So I'm happy with where we're at right now. All right. The next question is from Keen Frizzle, another Gladiators Flared Reddit user. Question here is, do players know when/if they're going to be filmed for Inside the Valiant, and do players have a say as to whether they're going to be filmed? First, I think it's fairly evident when there's someone filming players. There's at least one person carrying a pretty large piece of equipment that doesn't have a competitive function in the room in order to film. Um, so it's not like we're filming them with a hidden camera. Um, the person is there, and it's up to the players about how they act in that question or in that scenario. Do players have a say as to whether or not they are going to be filmed? So from our perspective, it's a little difficult, right? Because we want to create content, but most players that end up at a professional level of Overwatch, they kind of just want everyone to go away so that they can play Overwatch, right? Like they aren't as enthusiastic about doing things that don't involve the game because they want to practice and be the best that they can be. And we understand that. So the way that we've tried to structure this is by being very clear with the players about like where we are going to film and where we are not going to film. So for example, we do not film inside LA Valiant at the player apartments or the player residences. Like the residences are private, and the players kind of have that space to be perfectly on their own without intrusion, without content, nothing like that. But on campus, we view that as a filming area. The players are coming to work, and we, as part of what we do as an organization, are going to capture the story of the players in the best way that we can. So, from my perspective, it's good that there's a divide. It's good that the players have some places where they can be private and some places where they can be public. And it's also not a secret to them that they are going to get filmed. From our perspective, filming that content is a really important piece for creating the story behind the players and for creating a connection between fans and the players. Like there are still boundaries, right? Like there are definitely times where we've been very transparent, maybe a little too transparent. There have also been times where I think we've probably been a little too cautious and we should have been more transparent. So from our perspective, I feel like again we're on the right track with content. You're gonna see this Saturday when the next episode of Inside LA Valiant comes out, and you'll be able to judge for yourselves. Whether you think we're hitting that right balance or not. But I think as of right now, we feel okay with our future trajectory when it comes to content and the level of transparency there. The next question is from Gladiators Flare Tannen Falcon Wing. Outweighing a great Reddit username with a terrible flare. His question, or their question, is can you clarify more what you meant about there not being a spot on Valiant for both Agilities and Silk Thread, and why you didn't feel that it was worth investing the coaching time into both of them? Is this implying that not everyone is getting equal coaching time already? So this is a bit of a complicated question and plays a little bit on the question that I answered earlier about, being equal to every player is not necessarily being fair to the team in terms of giving the team the best chance to win. So to answer the second piece of that question, no, not everyone on Valiant gets the same amount of coaching attention and the same amount of coaching resources, because each player on Valiant needs a different amount of coaching attention. When coaches are kind of prioritizing which players they work with, they need to prioritize the players for whom their time will have the biggest impact. So they prioritize the players to work with that need the help the most, that have the highest potential to grow as players from that coaching time and coaching feedback. It's not about dividing up those resources equally. It's about focusing those resources in the places that gives the team the best chance to win. Specifically in the case of Agilities and Silk Thread, both of those players are kind of in the position where they are very talented players mechanically. They're very skilled players with potential to grow. But our coaching staff felt that in order to give the team the best chance of winning, they wanted to focus their attention on one of those players rather than splitting their attention between two different players. And they felt that because Agilities in their minds had a higher skill potential and a higher skill ceiling, they wanted to focus their attention on Agilities and find Silk Thread a different opportunity on a different team where he could get that coaching attention, since it didn't make sense to give him as much coaching time here. And from my perspective, that was a kind of very difficult, but also very responsible choice. Because, again, giving the same thing to every player, giving the same amount of coaching resources, being quote unquote fair to every player, isn't actually fair to the overall team. The coaches have to prioritize the resources that they give, and we have to prioritize the resources we give as an organization to maximize our chances of winning. It's not about like equality for equality's sake. It's about doing what the team needs to have the best chance of winning and the best chance of success on and off the field too. Clout asks, what is Stoop's role on the team? So initially, we brought Stoop on when we were creating kind of divided main and sister rosters, right? When we had 6 players that were on the main roster, 6 players that were on the sister roster, and those two were functioning as separate teams. And originally, we brought Stoop on specifically to be a coach for that sister roster. As our idea of how we wanted to structure the roster evolved, and we decided not to kind of have 2 separate 6-player rosters, but instead to have one 12-player roster, we didn't want that division to exist anymore. But we had really liked everything that we'd seen from Stoop, right? We knew that we needed extra coaching power. We knew that Stoop was a great fit for the team. We also knew he had a pre-existing relationship with Custa when they had both played, I think it was for Fnatic back in the early days of Overwatch. And he was just an overall great fit for our organization. So we were not thinking, oh, we don't have a sister team anymore, let's let Stoop go. No, we were thinking, how do we kind of empower Stoop to take on an even bigger role within the team? And so we're really happy to have him on board. He's a great member of the assistant coaching staff underneath Moon. And I think he does a really good job in working not just with the players that are playing on stage, but also the players that are trying to develop themselves in order to get a shot at stage time. And so he continues to be in an assistant coaching role for us. I think we're really happy to have him on board. So the next question is a really good question that I'm excited to answer, which is, what do you think Overwatch League can learn from LCS, and what do you think Overwatch League does better than LCS? So the commenter doesn't specify what they mean. I'm going to kind of treat this as like an internal team operations thing, though, i.e., what do you think Overwatch League rosters or players or coaches can learn from LCS, and what do you think Overwatch League players and rosters and coaches do better than LCS? So I think from my perspective, it's a pretty clear-cut answer. First, I think that LCS players do a much better job than Overwatch League players of kind of pacing themselves mentally and understanding how the ups and downs of a season, you kind of need to weather those in order to be at your best when it comes time for playoffs. So from my experience in LCS, the players that play there have a really good understanding of how to balance inside and outside the game, how to balance professional and personal life, and how to make sure that they're not getting burnt out by the time the end of the season rolls around. On the other side, what do you think Overwatch League does better than LCS? I think Overwatch League makes much better use of substitute players or non-starting players than LCS does. So when I was in LCS and when Immortals was in LCS, most LCS teams, they would have subs, but those subs weren't really active members of the team environment or the day-to-day team operations. And I think even still, now that every LCS team has an academy team, most of those academy players are just not near the level of the main LCS players. And so there's not that much that those academy players can offer when it comes to kind of building out an overall infrastructure. So most of the focus from LCS teams is on their starting 5 players. Whereas from my perspective, Overwatch League overall has done a much better job of integrating players that are not getting as much stage time and integrating a bigger roster than just the core 6 necessary to play in Overwatch League. So from my perspective, I think that's something that LCS could learn, but I also want to recognize that Overwatch League is in a much different scenario, right? Overwatch League kind of pulls from a global talent base, and it has, 12 teams that cover the entire global talent of Overwatch League. Whereas LCS has 10 North American teams, 10 European teams, and even more teams globally around the world. So with LCS, that talent gets a lot more diluted. And because of the way that LCS restricts the number of players from outside of the region, it's a lot harder for LCS teams to kind of build a main squad and a sub squad that are close to each other in competitive level. Whereas with Overwatch League, because there are fewer global teams, but still a very big global talent base, you're able to have a lot more redundancy of talent within a single team and within a single organization than you can achieve from an LCS perspective. I don't know how that will change as the league expands in Overwatch League, right? Maybe we'll hit 20 or 22 or 24 teams and end up in a situation where every team still has a great core 6 players, but they're not able to maintain a full 12 players that are at an Overwatch League level. I think we kind of have to wait and see how that works and see how the talent pipeline develops over the next few years. But at least as of today, that's kind of how I view the differences between LCS and Overwatch League team operations. Fire Element 6 asks two questions. First, with nearly half of the teams in Overwatch League having had a representative on OverSight, will you or another Vala member be on soon, provided Monty or Thorin want to pick brains? Answer is easy. Absolutely. I've been on Thorin videos before. I like Monty. Uh, I would feel comfortable with either myself or one of our coaches or one of our players going on to OverSight to talk more about their perspective on the league and on life and on Overwatch. The second question is also interesting. Has Overwatch League changed your previous stance from one of Thorin's videos that I was on called Esports Salon of having mainly Western rosters to more of a marketable regardless of origin standpoint? So for context, for those of you that haven't seen it, I was on one of Thorin's videos, kind of an esports salon, an esports discussion panel, talking about kind of import player restrictions and whether I thought it was good or bad for a league to allow an unlimited number of Korean players, especially a league with geographic representation for cities like New York, London, cities that aren't fully Korean but currently have full Korean rosters representing them. On that show, I took the position that I liked having restrictions on the number of non-American players you could have on an American team or non-European players you could have on a European team. And that personally, even though Overwatch League didn't have those restrictions, we would still not be building a full Korean roster, even if that was the most competitive roster that we could build. From my perspective, even having seen the growth of Overwatch League, I don't think my perspective has, or my opinion on that has changed that much. I think the initial success of rosters like the New York XL or the London Spitfire from a competitive perspective have been great, right? I think having full Korean rosters has been really good for them to win lots of games. But I also think, from my perspective, that the real battle isn't going to be fought in year one of Overwatch League, right? For when I view the future of Overwatch League, it's not just how do we get lots of people that are already big esports fans to watch Overwatch League, right? Because a lot of those people don't have any issues when it comes to cheering for a full Korean team that represents New York. But I think the real battle for Overwatch League is looking forward into years 3 and beyond when you have, when you have teams in their own home markets doing home games, needing to build their local fan bases. And from my perspective, that's when it'll become a lot more difficult if you're a full Korean team representing New York or a full Korean team representing London. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that, at no point in our planning for Los Angeles Valiant, we were never thinking of going for a full Korean roster. We always knew that we wanted to keep a more balanced geographic representation because we knew that we needed our team, at least in some way, to represent our market. If we're going to go out there to people that aren't already esports fans and say, hey, you should really care about Overwatch League and you should care about the Los Angeles representative, like your city's representative in Overwatch League, we needed to be able to, tell them a story that they could recognize. And as much as I love the stories of players like Sabiolbi or Arc or Pine or Gesture or Birdring, like they're all great players and they're great people too. But it's just not as easy for someone that's never encountered esports before to understand why of the 12 players that are representing their home city, why none of those players come from a similar background as them. Right? I think representation is super important, right? I think, having players like Geggery in Overwatch League is great, right? Having female players at the highest level of professional play is really good for showing other women and girls that there is a place for them in competitive gaming and in esports. And I think in a very similar way, having Western players, whether they're Europeans representing European cities or Americans representing American cities, having them at the top level of professional play is essential to show Americans and Europeans and people who aren't from Korea that there is a place for them at the highest level of professional play and to be a part of this community too. And I think that's why I find it so important, right? It's not just about, you know, having. I mean, I wouldn't even describe it as. I mean, maybe a cultural thing is the best way to put it, right? Like maybe the best way to describe it is it's really important to have American fans understand that people that come from the same cultural background as them, that people that come from the same geographic territory as them, they need to understand that those people can also be at the highest levels of professional play. And we want to make sure that we have a team that is representative of the city that we are representing. And that means we have Korean players, just like there's a large Korean population in Los Angeles and Southern California. We have European players. We have Canadian players. We have American players, and those aren't just geographic determinations, but even within American and Canadian and European, there's not a unified cultural or racial background that those players come from. So I think this is becoming a little bit of a jumbled answer as I kind of follow down the multiple different paths that I could go. Um, but I guess just to sum up, I still very much believe it is important for Western cities to have Western representation on them in order to fully connect with their fan bases. Um, but that's also just a theory, right? Like we'll see how things go in the next few years. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll be right. But that's kind of how I'm thinking about it right now. We are going to move on to a question from BP the Great. Will we see more fun content of the team doing things together, as opposed to the more serious tone of the videos that focuses on their matches? I think this is a fair question, and I guess very similar to how we're thinking about creating content in general. We when we create content, we're not looking to like stage fun experiences for the purposes of creating content around it, right? Like when we want the team to do fun things together, we do it because there's fun things for them to do together, and it's good for them, and it's a good way to de-stress. And then if we happen to film it, then we film it. So with Fade and Kareev, like going out fishing was a fun thing we wanted to take them to do that we happened to film. When we brought in puppies, we did it because we wanted the players to have the opportunity to play with puppies. And then we filmed it because the puppies happened to be there. But I think when we think about how we're creating content, we want to show the real story of what's going on behind the scenes. That's why we're doing this transparency stuff in the first place. And so I'm not looking to kind of stage funny videos so that people can just to paint a smile on the face of the organization, even if things aren't going that well, right? Sometimes things aren't going that well. Sometimes there are downswings and sometimes there are upswings. And part of being honest with our fans and part of showing fans the real story of what's going on behind the scenes involves being, even with all the memes around it, being transparent about what's going on. Again, I feel like I'm getting away from the core question here, but the core question, or I guess the core answer is, yeah, you're going to see more fun content of the team doing things together, not because we're going to do those things in order to create content around them, but because we want to do those things anyway. So when the team goes out to do fun stuff, we're going to create content around it. When the team is being very serious and needing to focus in on the game and focus in on practice, you're going to see videos that focus on that. And that's kind of how we're going to approach content. So before I answered a little bit about the in and out scene from inside LA Valiant and how in some ways it wasn't executed correctly, even though the intention behind it was honest. And so the follow-up question from Dan Del Toro is, do you think that having a conversation with a player about his future on the team is something better done off camera entirely? And I think that's a very fair question. I guess first I want to explain our philosophy when it comes to content and kind of the philosophy that we shared with the players about why we wanted to do things like this. Our perspective as an organization and my perspective as a person is that it is always better to show someone your kind of true face and to show someone what's actually going on and then leave the decision about whether they love that or they hate that in their hands. And traditionally, I found that to end up producing about 50% of the people loving you and 50% of the people hating you for that, rather than everyone kind of just generically liking you. And as we create fans as an organization, we're not looking to just have a bunch of people that like us. We want to have fans that love us, that don't just love us for who we are on the outside, but that really understand the pieces inside of the organization that make us who we are. We want a real identity, even if that identity is polarizing and even if that identity is controversial. When it comes to how that applies to players, it's not up to us to decide how the players represent themselves, right? If the players want to be a little more generic, if they want everyone to like them, that's their call. But when we tell our story as an organization, we don't want to tell a story that is kind of watered down. We want to be we want to show the full picture and leave it up to the community to decide whether they like what they see or they don't, whether they want to love us or whether they want to hate us. And so there's a balance to strike about how transparent to get. Like, yes, Agilities is a young player. Having a conversation with him about his future on the team and about his career on camera is not like the easiest situation for him, and it's not the easiest situation for the organization, right? It's a delicate situation, and it's something that can affect the fan base and affect the broader community. At the same time, concealing that conversation and having to have people like wonder in the dark about the results of it and what led to that decision in the first place is also not great. So we have to remember that there isn't a solution here that prevents the community from speculating about why things happen, right? If we don't have Inside LA Valiant with the in and out scene, then nobody gets to see behind the scenes of why we made the decisions that we made. Everybody's kind of left in the dark about what did Agilities need to improve in order to get more playtime? Why was he not on the starting roster in the first place? How did things change when Coach Moon came in? And how did things change otherwise? I think from our perspective, we had to, in some ways, try to strike a balance between forestalling community speculation by being transparent about it, while also trying to be, I guess, in some ways, gentle in how we portray things. And I don't know that we got that balance right here, right? Like, I don't know that we did it as well as we could have or as well as we should have. But I also think that the only person that gets directly negatively impacted by it and the only person that, you know, deserves an apology for a mishandled situation like that is Agilities, right? Like the community, the other players on the team, like the person that's impacted most by that is Agilities. So when we make a mistake or when we do something that might not be perfect or even, might not be executed in the best way possible, we have to make sure that we keep in mind the interests of the person most impacted by it, not, the peanut gallery. And that's not meant in a diminutive way. That's just meant that like that's what we see the biggest impact being and our primary responsibility being. So, with 15 minutes left until the start of OWL for today, I'm going to stop answering Reddit questions and start answering Discord questions. Yay! Okay. So please don't, if chat moves too fast, I'm not going to be able to read any of the questions. So please no spam. I will mute you if you spam. So you should go ahead and drop some questions, and I'll answer as many as I can in the next 10 minutes. Coffee. You got in there fast. What is the process that you guys undergo in order to select players from contenders? Who does the scouting, criteria, etc.? And what was the process behind getting rid of the sister team? So first, sister team question. We didn't actually get rid of the sister team. What changed was more so a structure, right? So we changed the structure away from having one 6-person roster and then a separated 6-person roster to just having a single 12-person roster. So it wasn't like we ditched all the sister team players and had to rebuild from scratch. A lot of those players are still with us. It was just kind of abolishing the concept of a sister team. And kind of reintroducing the concept of a single 12-person roster. When it comes to scouting and selecting players from contenders, we're fortunate that a lot of our players have long histories in the North American and European scene, and so they have experience with a lot of the players that are right now playing in contenders. Our coaches and our players all have strong networks that are still very plugged into the contender scenes, and then we also do tryouts to understand who's a best fit for our team in particular. Audrey, I'm not going to hire you to be on the Valiant competitive team because you're too good a mod. So I can't change your current position. It would be too big a loss for us. Athos is asking, how is the overall team environment now with the new stage and the roster changes? First, not all of our roster additions are here yet, right? A lot of them are still kind of waiting on visas and waiting to move into the apartment complex and the campus. But things so far are really good, right? I think people feel bought into the new system from what I see in scrims. Things are very positive, very growth oriented rather than results oriented, and that's kind of what I like to see. NC, can I ask Verbo to please post a selfie? I think that's going to be up to Verbo, not up to me. And he is on the way to the game right now, so no, I will not. Val Senpai, can our mods fight in a gladiatorial match for a salary? I mean, if that's not a description of Overwatch League, I don't know what is. So I think our mods, i.e. the players, are already fighting in gladiatorial matches for a salary. Although, and it even works because we get to beat up on actual gladiators, aka the other LA team. Allison, you're flying into LA for the Valiant Pride Party. Will you get to meet the team and get some autographs? I actually don't know the exact schedule for the Valiant Pride Party. I hope you will be able to because that sounds cool, but I don't want to commit to that. But I am looking forward to seeing you at the Valiant Pride Party on, I think, the week of June 7th, which should be pretty fun. Can I talk about the mindset around benching agilities? First, I really don't like using the term benching. It makes it sound like it's a punishment. It really wasn't a punishment. With agilities, we were in a bit of a difficult situation because agilities is a player that was taking a lot of the heat internally in the team when we weren't performing that well. And it was just having a really bad impact on the team environment, right? And agilities is a player that needs some like positive attention from coaching staff and from other players in order to improve. And so with Coach Moon in Korea waiting on his visa, he had to kind of make a decision for the short term, just how do we keep things held together for a few weeks until I can get there. And his solution for that was having Kareev move back to a flex DPS role on a temporary basis in order to give agilities a little bit of breathing room outside of the main roster. So that was kind of the thought process around that. What other improvements have been made to ensure that every player has time to practice with the team and improve? I think really important to that has been bringing in a full 12 players that are all at an Overwatch League level already, right? I think one of the biggest difficulties previously was that because the players on the sister team didn't have a lot of scrim time, it was hard for them to really, uh, you know, put up a fight sounds wrong, right? But it was hard for them to challenge the main roster in a scrim environment. And so scrims between the two rosters weren't super effective for either team. Whereas now, I think as players have a more balanced ability to get that coaching attention and get that scrim time, the two rosters will be closer to each other in terms of competitive performance, and that means internal scrims are going to be a lot more effective. Is Unkoe toxic? No, and I don't like just kind of using toxic as a tag for players. Um, Unkoe is like a great player. He's a great guy. The way he gives feedback is very unique to him, right? And a lot of players that have been part of team environments without strong coaching staffs use like direct feedback in order to make sure that the team improves because they have to, right? And sometimes that works really well. It sounds like so far that type of communication is working really well for him on Dallas Fuel, and I'm happy about that. But for us and the players that we have, that type of communication wasn't as effective. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a roster that all kind of communicated in a very similar way and created space for the coaching staff to be a feedback mechanism. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. What is my SR? I am proud to say my SR has finally crossed the 2300 mark. I am on my way to plat. I will get there soon. Do I think mobile is the future of gaming and where the future of esports will shift to? I think it's possible. We're investing on the Immortal side into mobile esports like Clash Royale and Arena of Valor because we do think that mobile is a really important piece and helps esports become a lot more accessible to people. But yeah, I mean, I don't know the future. I don't know if it'll be the future. But it's an option. It could be a future of gaming and esports, and so it's something that we want to invest in early. Is a quesadilla a sandwich? Yes, a quesadilla is a sandwich. For clarity, a sandwich is anything where there is bread and then filling and then bread on the bottom. And, tortillas, I guess, in this scenario are a kind of bread. Would you consider making a podcast for the superfans of the LA Valiant? My time is unfortunately pretty limited, as is the time of the staff and the players. What I would recommend is if superfans really want a LA Valiant superfan podcast, you should go ahead and create one, and then we will help you promote it and get audience for it, and maybe give you interviews with players and coaching staff to have on the podcast. Is Agility's best waifu? I'm going to defer to Kareev on that one. Fury, yes, we will still have two teams practicing, but as more of a unified unit, and there will be more movement in between those rosters, and there will be more internal scrims. Don't I agree that the Gladiators Reddit flare is pretty nice? Audrey, you are really testing me on keeping that mod position, and I would recommend hiding your affinity for that team in my Discord AMAs. Will Numlocked play in Stage 3 or 4? That is really up to Numlocked and Fate and the coaching staff, not up to me, because I do not make those type of roster decisions. Numlocked so far has been a great person to have on the team. He has a really positive impact on team environment. He is an experienced and mature player, and I'm happy to have him. And I hope that circumstances align so that he does get stage time. But again, that is not my call. Can I tell NC to go study? Yes, NC, the number of times I see in this Discord that you have to study and you're not studying in order to stay in the Discord longer makes me worried for the future of your education. With Bunny in the mix, how do you see his role with the team and how can he provide for a well-functioning Valiant team? Bunny is awesome. Bunny is super cheerful and super positive, a lot like Kareev. And so we think that he's a great player and he'll do a lot to help contribute on that tracer role, but also someone that can really help move the team culture in a direction that's beneficial for everybody. Does Soon communicate similarly to Unkoe coming from Rogue? What informed the decision to keep him? I mean, I think Soon and Unkoe are individuals, right? So they're unique in their communication styles, as all individuals are. From my perspective, I think for us, A, Soon was more open to the kind of full 12-player roster rotation that we were creating, and B, I think just the way he communicates is different from Unkoe, and so it fit a little better with what we were looking for. Can we ban Noah from his own Discord? Well, you can try, but all the people in yellow get paid by me, so they can't. The introduction videos on Custa and Bunny. I don't know specifically which individual produced those, but those were all produced by the same content team that's led by our VP of content, JMR Luna. Is Coach Daemon's position in jeopardy now that there's only one baguette left? No, though he will go hungry as soon as that last baguette is eaten. The real answer is no, of course not. Daemon wasn't just brought on because he's French. Daemon was brought on because he's a great coach that has a really strategic and tactical mind for the game. He's an excellent addition to the coaching staff. And, we were luckily and fortunately connected to him because of the French connection between the players that we had on the roster and him. But independent of how many French players we have on the roster, I think Daemon's a really important part of what we do at Valiant. What could Valiant as a team learn from other teams, specifically other Western ones? I think as a team, we have definitely looked at the effective, or what I view from an external perspective, as the effective 12-player rotation that Philly Fusion has created. It seems like they've done, again, from an external perspective, I don't know what things are like inside the team environment. But from my perspective, it looks like they've done a very good job at creating a good team environment with the 12 players that they've had, and that helped inform our decision to move to a full 12-player roster. I've owned Overwatch for a year and sat down to play it a few times because I'm unnerved by the toxicity. Yeah, I mean, that's tough. Look, like, the internet is frequently a terrible place, not just in Overwatch, but social media, pretty much everywhere where people can interact with each other on the internet. If you like the game of Overwatch, but you don't want to deal with toxicity, I would highly recommend using community features like this Discord channel to find people that you can be friends with, that are friendly, that you can play with, right? If you can create a 6 stack out of the people in this Discord and someone's toxic to you, you let me know and I will make sure they get kicked out or something like that. I think I can do that. Has there been anger or unrest with any players like Numlock that haven't been getting playtime? I mean, look, I'm sure you guys have seen some of the streams from players that weren't super happy in Stage 1 and Stage 2. We take that feedback to heart. I think for me, Numlocked is a really good barometer for how the team is doing, right? I think if he feels happy and he feels optimistic, that means that the team is in a good place. And so I've been happy to see that over the last few weeks, he's been happy with the direction of the team. So if Numlocked is happy, if the players are happy, if the staff is happy, I'm happy. And if people aren't happy, I think that indicates that we need to make some changes in order to get everyone more on the same page, or in order to make sure that the structure better assists the players that aren't having a great time of it. Is it okay if I don't study so I can spend time in this amazing community? NC, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but if you flunk all of your classes and then you can't spend any more time in this amazing community because you have to go out and, I don't know, sustain yourself and make a living without an education, then that just ends up hurting all of us. So for the Discord's sake, for the sake of LA Valiant, go study. Will we ever be able to buy one of those awesome Columbia jackets? I don't know. At the moment, I'm thinking no, because those are our kind of game day staff uniform, and we want to keep that pretty special. But we will do our best to make cool merch available for fans beyond what Overwatch League already makes. Is there anything Valiant related planned outside of North America? Unfortunately, no. We are a Los Angeles and Southern California team, which means our efforts are focused on Los Angeles and Southern California. Is there any communication between Overwatch League team owners on how to run teams, or is it all done on the fly? Yeah, we talk a bunch about things that we're trying and strategies that are most effective for business operations. Do you have any tips for starting a team and getting people who actually get on and help? If you mean like an official organization that you're like running as a business, I got super lucky to get in at the time that I did and be able to make my impact on the industry. It's not an easy thing. If you mean like creating a roster, just to like play with each other, I recommend using community features like this Discord. Do I main Winston? Kinda. Yeah. I actually stopped maining Winston because it was too memeable, and I play a lot of Tracer now. All right. Well, it looks like Overwatch League is starting, so I'm going to wrap this up. I would encourage all of you to check out our social media for news about our upcoming Valiant fan art show. Whether you are able to attend in person or not, whether you are able to send in art or not, we think it's really cool and a great celebration of all the amazing fan artists that are part of not just our community, but the overall Overwatch League community, and we love celebrating you. So celebrate your peers, come be a part of what we're doing. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to have more opportunities to chat with you all in the future. Thanks, everybody.